Yep,
Yeah.
here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Experiential Realism. I'm Arlindo, the philosophical artist, and joining me today is Sally Daniels-Taylor, another artist, a tarot practitioner, an energy healer, a psychic medium, and she's also the co-host of Soul Explorers podcast with her friend Gary Langley. Sally, I came across one of your posts on Facebook. I think it was the Bernardo Castro Facebook group, or maybe another group about consciousness. I can't remember. But I resonated with everything you said. You seemed to agree with some kind of oneness or monism regarding the nature of reality and consciousness. And I was wondering if there's a type of metaphysic that you subscribe to, like idealism or panpsychism, or any other ism.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting question. Probably idealism is the most closely connected to what I have experienced. Isms are just ways of thinking, right?
Yeah, that's
Ways
right.
of trying to understand the world. And so most of what I have finally come to in my personal understanding has been a combination of study of all of the belief systems of the past, as well as that are currently in the world today, but also experience, and then trying to understand the experiences that I've had, and where is there overlap between what is thought or believed or known by other individuals and what I have experienced, and how can I make sense of it. So that has largely gotten me to where I am. There was, I will say, an event in my life, though, that made it suddenly a need to know issue.
Right.
And that was that my 17-year-old son, Todd, transitioned by suicide back in 2012.
Oh,
And I suddenly went from an interested person who could kind of take or leave whatever, I looked at, to somebody who had a really urgent need to understand the nature of reality. And was there anything left of my son that I could connect to with his physical body gone? And lo and behold, it turns out that you can, and there is. And I became very convinced of the primal nature of consciousness and how everything arises from there. And the sense of oneness has, again, it's both having studied other philosophies, but it's also something that you tap into as you open yourself to other layers of your own conscious experience. And so it has come about in kind of a convoluted way. But yeah, I think we're on the same, we're reading the same book, basically.
yeah. Actually, I can definitely relate to your experience with losing someone to suicide. I mean, you lost your son. I lost my stepfather to suicide as well, and it's funny that one of our last conversations was regarding you know the afterlife, and he actually said to me, if when my time comes, if there is anything after this life, then I will do my best to communicate that to you. So when the tragedy finally happened, and I was grieving, he started coming to me in dreams. And at first, I didn't know I was dreaming, and then suddenly I would realize that he was dead, and yet he was talking to me, in front of me, and that would cause me to become lucid in the dream.
Right.
And
Exactly.
the first time it happened, yeah, the first time it happens, I was like, oh, you're dead. And then he would say to me, yes, that's right. And it was a brief moment of lucidity, and then I would wake up. So that made me question the nature of those experiences. So I began to think, is it my, in a materialistic sense, I was thinking, is it because I'm grieving and then my brain is coming up with, scenarios that, how can I say this, that try to make me feel better? Is it my brain, just because I've been thinking about it, because I'm grieving, it's coming up with scenarios that make me feel more comfortable, and basically it's just all my imagination from my subconscious mind. At the time I was thinking like that, but then a part of me was wondering, could it really be him doing what he said he would do? So I was already into lucid dreaming by that time. Actually, I've had lucid dreams and out of body experiences since I was a kid.
Yep.
But I started my experience, like my practice, seriously about 15 years ago. So my stepfather died about 20 years ago, right? So I began to try to explore my own mind, and I was wondering about the nature of reality, and if there was something after. I delved into New Age, and I was thinking, I thought, I'm going to be open to the possibility of an afterlife, and I'm going to look into New Age, but always from a naturalist perspective. I thought, if there is an afterlife, then it must be because nature allows for it to happen, and there must be some kind of explanation behind it, right? So I wasn't thinking in religious terms or anything like that. So I got into lucid dreaming, and one time I decided to induce a wake initiated lucid dream. So I was relaxing in bed, I was awake, but I was trying to relax as much as I could, to do the mind awake, body
Mind
asleep.
awake, body asleep. Right.
Right. And,
I'm familiar.
yeah, that's right. So I ended up having like an out of body experience, but the bedroom, my bedroom at the time, was inaccurate. So I noticed, okay, so I'm in this bedroom. It looks like my bedroom, but there are some inconsistencies here. So, and I wasn't even thinking about my stepfather, mind you. So I was exploring the structure of this dream bedroom, and all of a sudden, the the bedroom began to change even more, and then it got to the point where it felt like I was in a tower, and then I began to go up a spiral staircase, and I ended up, and I was exploring it. I was like, hold on a minute, this is very different. And I went into a room, and in this room there was a row of windows, and outside the sky was pink. It was a beautiful pink color. And then behind me there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and there was this tall man with really pale skin, and he said, "Oh, you have a visitor." And I was like, "Oh my god!" I knew it was a dream. I was lucid dreaming, but this was really strange because I wasn't controlling any of this. And this man said to me, "You have a visitor." So he steps aside out of view, and then I saw my deceased stepfather, and then we had a conversation, and he said, "It's real. The afterlife is real. Blah blah. I'm okay." And then we embraced. I felt really emotional. I hugged him, and then when it was time to go, for some reason it was time to go, I don't know, and I began to go down the staircase, the spiral staircase, and he stayed at the top, and I looked up, and I could still see him smiling at me, and he was in the light, like there was a light shining down on him. and I was going down the staircase into darkness, and I was just glad he was okay. And I went further down the steps, and then suddenly I fell, and I felt this falling sensation, and then I woke up, and my body shook, and that really made me think. It's like at the time, as a materialist, I was thinking, I want to believe this is real, but at the same time, could it just be a hallucination? I was conflicted, but now, because I've done my U-turn about 2 years ago from materialism to idealism, something to do with a trio of scientists won the Nobel Prize in Physics for testing Bell's inequalities, and basically they proved local realism is false. So that made me think, hold on a minute, materialism doesn't make sense, and moreover, all of them abandoned materialism in favor of idealism, and one of them even wrote a paper about idealism. So that's what kickstarted my U-turn. And now I look back at these experiences, and I think there's something more to them.
Well, and that was, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was
No,
one of
that's
the
fine.
things that was also an early convincer for me, was that our physicists, especially our quantum physicists, sound very much like mystics. You
Yeah,
know, the things that they're saying, the language may be slightly changed,
yeah,
for the science, but they're saying the identical things that mystics have been saying for millennia.
yeah,
And
that's right.
so science and mysticism have definitely come full circle and are now supporting each other, as opposed to, being opposite on opposite sides. And I would claim that materialist science is pure dogma at this point. And the people that hold on to it like they hold on to religion, you know?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right. I mean, that's exactly what I found. I began to, because I'm also interested in science, so I began to look deeply into science, and I realized, hold on a minute, science doesn't really take a position. It doesn't take a position regarding God, right? It's not really atheistic. It's neutral, basically. Hence the God hypothesis. And then there's also the materialist side. It doesn't really affirm materialism. Um, it seems like science can only tell us how matter behaves, but not what it is in and of itself. So it seems like that's the realm of metaphysics. So, and I think both can inform each other. But I think if we
right,
have the wrong metaphysical assumption, then we're not going to be doing very good science. And I think
right.
we're finding that out.
Well, and to go back to your dream experiences, those are classic dream visitations. And one of the first experiences I had after my son transitioned as well, that made me go, could this be real?
Yeah.
Because my son came fairly early on twice. The first time he just said, and this was within days after his transition, he said, "You couldn't have prevented my death." And then bam, he was gone and it was over. But it was so vivid and it was so visceral and it felt so real. The following day, my sister came and told me that her daughter, 2 days earlier, had had a dream where Todd showed up and said, "You could not have prevented my death."
Wow.
And so it just kind of, that little bit of extra validation gave me just enough hope to say, can I experience more? And then about a month or two later, he popped in again, very briefly. As a general rule, dream visitations are brief. I don't know about initiated lucid dreaming visitations, but I would say typically they tend to be brief. And the second time, he simply came and said, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused to all the people who love me."
Yeah.
And so, and yet again, so it's like he was physically there. I will say the conversation, though, well, I say conversation, it was really a statement that he made, was telepathic in nature. He didn't have to move his lips to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he came and he went. He did what he needed to do. right? He got across the information he came to share, and then it was over. But
Yeah.
I've also had out of body experiences, and they change your worldview. They really do.
Yeah, I was just about to say, yeah. I've also, when the communication was going on with my stepfather in that particular lucid dream, it felt more like telepathic. Like there wasn't much lips moving or anything like that, and it
Right.
felt really emotional, really like,
Yes.
yeah, like a closeness and connection. Yeah. So yeah, everything you've been saying absolutely resonates with me. So, and you mentioned something like a synchronicity uh, with what you experienced and then your sister. And I'm wondering
Right.
if you experience synchronicities a lot.
All the time.
Right.
And again, in the past, I might have just blown them off as coincidence. But when you become aware of the possibility of synchronicity being able to provide you with information in reality, is what synchronicity is often about, then you're less likely to sort of discard it as something that's just happenstance, and instead can go, oh, thank you for that confirmation. Because more often than not, synchronicity is to show you that something you thought or experienced was valid or was accurate. And it just sort of backs up what you may have already come to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I've also been revising Carl Jung's synchronicity, the idea that reality has more layers, which he explored with a known physicist, Wolfgang Pauli. And I've been experiencing these synchronicities myself more and more, and I don't even look for them. It's one that really struck me is I was actually, because I've been exploring near-death experiences lately, because I think they can give us glimpses of an afterlife. And I was watching this this NDE case on the Coming Home channel, and it was about a man who he was a what was he a coast guard, I think, and there was a massive storm at sea, and he nearly drowned. And as we were, and on the Coming Home channel, they usually have visuals. They illustrate the story with images of what's being described. And I said to my wife, "Wow, this reminds me of the movie A Perfect Circle, which is actually based on a true story." And I said that, it's reminding me of that movie, The Perfect Circle. And then, we finished watching that episode on the Coming Home channel. And then on my phone, when I looked at my phone and I was looking on YouTube, uh, a video on the Sam Harris podcast, Making Sense, comes up, right? And I don't know if you know, Sam Harris is a neuroscientist. It is
Yeah.
probably one of the four horsemen of atheism, and is probably
Right.
more open to these things than any of the other four. So anyway, a video comes up of Sam Harris interviewing, and this was on the same day, Sam Harris interviewing, what's his name? Sebastian Younger. Yeah, that's his name. And Sebastian Younger is the same guy who wrote A Perfect Storm, on which the film was based. And I was like, what the hell? And then on the same video, Sebastian Younger is telling Sam Harris about an NDE he had that made him question the nature of reality, because in his NDE, he saw his deceased father. His father had been dead for 8 years, and he was a physicist, a materialist. But in the NDE, he was saying, "I'm here for you, son. you can come with me, I'll show you around. And that startled him, and he was like, oh no. And then he was rescued by the doctors. And then that prompted him to write a book about a possible afterlife, right? And I said to my wife, can you believe this? I didn't even know who Sebastian Junger was until, the Making Sense podcast mentioned that he's actually the author of A Perfect Storm. And it coincided with the NDE of this other person that we were watching that nearly drowned. And yeah, and this
Yep.
and the guy, the author, also happened to have an NDE. And to me, that was like a very strong synchronicity. I couldn't believe it.
Yes.
And then ever since, I've been having these synchronicities. And just very quickly, another recent one, and most people will just dismiss it. Oh, it's just some coincidence, but yeah, I was thinking about like a void experience that my friend Stephen Wallard from the Hermetic Idealism channel had, because he also nearly drowned, and he said he experienced a void. So I was thinking, I've heard about this void, and a lot of people describe it as like a holding place, but because he was then rescued and woke up, he only experienced a void. So he was wondering, oh, is that what it's like for me? Then there's nothing. And I was wondering about this, and I did say, oh, it could be a holding place, or it could be that if you hadn't made it, you might have gone on to experience something mystical. And I was thinking about this. I went away from this. I was thinking about, what he might have experienced. And then I had my Spotify on, and on Spotify, a song by Phil Collins comes on. I was wondering, what would he have experienced? And the song by Phil Collins comes up, called Dance Into the Light. You know that song?
Right.
Everybody
Right.
dance into the light.
Yes.
And then it says, we're all one voice, one mind, or something like that. And I was thinking, is reality trying to tell me something? Is that what he would have gone on to do? He would have merged with the light. He would have had a blissful time, like, I don't
Yes.
know.
Well, a
That
lot
was
of
making me
people,
think differently. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of people experience that void. A lot of NDEers may talk about it and say they experience it for a period of time. I've even, heard deathbed experiences of the void as people kind of come and go. They're not quite gone from their body yet, but they may have some shift in consciousness that occurs. Had some great experiences with my father as he was transitioning. But yeah, that it seems to be, I'll call it a location. I mean, that's not the right word for it.
Yeah.
But most people experience it as a very positive thing, that it's not scary. They're not fearful in the moment. It feels, loving, like a blanket almost. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do experience that void. It's possible that, because one of the concepts that I have come through my own development and my own work is that you will experience, when you leave this physical body for the last time, what you expect to experience. And
Right.
so
That
if
makes
you're
sense.
Christian, you'll experience a Christian heaven, perhaps. If you think you're going to go to hell, you may experience something hellish for a period of time. Now, that said, I don't necessarily believe in hell,
Yeah.
right? But you could experience something based out of your own fear or your own concerns that would resemble that. Almost no one stays in that for very long
Right.
after they have transitioned. They get to a point of surrender, or they call out for assistance, and that assistance does seem to come from what I have learned
I
and
see. So eventually
experienced.
they shatter the illusion. It,
Exactly.
it brings to mind the story of the Buddha, and when he was meditating, and they say he was experiencing the illusions of Maya. And obviously in the story they personify Maya. It's like the Lord of Illusions, and everything he was seeing as he was in deep meditation, he didn't let it affect him because he understood it's all an illusion. And then suddenly he was free. And yeah, I wonder if it's something similar to that, you know.
Yeah, I think that as you know, physicists talk about this world as being illusory, as do the mystics, right? That it's really a construct. I think we will continue to experience constructs after this life. You know, you can continue to have a body of some form of physicality. I mean, you know, it won't be as dense as this one, but you can still have a body after you transition. But you can also get to stages where that body is no longer needed and no longer necessary. And so, you know, you experience, at least initially, what you'll be comfortable with, where you will feel loved and accepted and where you resonate. And over time, as your consciousness expands, you'll experience expansion along with that. And I think we can do that even here, right? We
Yeah.
can experience those states of conscious expansion through lucid dreaming, through out of body experiences, through near death experiences, through meditation, you know, all these different ways that we can open ourselves to greater experience. And
Yeah.
for me, that's how I came to the psychic mediumistic stuff, is finally accepting that these messages or information that I was feeling like thoughts, because they felt like thoughts, but they
Yeah.
didn't necessarily feel like my own thoughts, you know?
Right.
And they weren't in first person, you know? If I'm thinking about myself, I'm usually using words like I and me and my,
Yeah.
right? And I was getting a lot of yous and, you know, that kind of thing, as if someone was speaking to me. Um, and as I began to accept that that was a possibility,
Yeah.
then the validation came
Wow.
that, oh yeah, this was from outside of myself, things I could not have known,
Yeah.
and could then, you know, start to trust it,
I
because
see.
I was hard pressed to trust it
Yeah.
initially,
Yeah. I can
right?
imagine. Yeah. Yeah. Especially if, you know, there's always that belief that people could be losing their minds. And especially, you know, if it was happening to me at the same level as what you experienced, um, you know, that, you know, being open to all this information that you're receiving, I would be at first reluctant to tell people about it because they might think, oh, maybe you should see someone, you know, like you're hearing voices, or, you know, you don't think it's your own mind. I mean, did you face that? Was it like a gradual process
I
and then
still do. No, I
you'll
still
do?
worry about those things. Yes, of course.
Oh,
You know, because I'm human, and I, number one, I don't like to be wrong, for one, you know.
yeah,
Um, I mean, it's okay if I am. The fact is that at this point in my life, I am open to having my mind changed about things if the evidence supports it. So the more I know, the less I realize I actually know. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's like a little bit of education. You start to see what you really have left to learn and have left to understand. So, you know, I might have a grasp on a very small portion of it. But if evidence shows up that causes me to reconsider previous ideas, then I hope I am always open to that. And again, we were talking just briefly before we started that that's a true skeptic, right?
yeah,
If you're closed off about new information, you're not a skeptic. You're
yeah.
a
Then,
cynic,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Uh,
There's
and
definitely a
so it's
distinction to be made between skepticism and
yeah,
dismissiveness. Yeah. If you're just going to
right,
dismiss everything without looking into it, then you're not a
exactly.
true skeptic. Yeah.
And the fact is there are mountains and mountains of hard evidence
Yeah.
that consciousness is primary,
Yeah.
that we create the reality that we experience, that we, though we may not remember it, probably made a choice to come in to have this particular experience and to focus into these physical bodies. I really believe that we are more out of the body than we are in.
Yeah.
And that the brain simply filters consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. I've come to realize, especially uh, as I've been doing my research into NDEs, and I'm currently reading a book by Dr. Bruce Grayson called After, and there's so many stories that most of them have commonalities. They can be different, but there's like universal themes behind it, and often people have life reviews, and sometimes they realize they remember that. I always refer to the case of this woman called Nancy Rhines, and when she had her NDE, she went to a blissful place or state. She saw this beautiful landscape, and she thought she was in heaven. And then there was this woman there, and this woman was like a guide, and she said, actually, no, it's not heaven. It's only a holding place to make you feel comfortable. And she said, oh, I want to stay here forever. I never want to leave. And the woman said to her, actually, you do want to leave. You do want to go back. You have to go back. And she was like, no, don't tell me what I want to do. I want to stay here. And the woman said, no, remember, you wanted this. You planned your life. You agreed to it. And you agreed to have this experience and to go back. And as soon as she received this information, she said it was like telepathy, like what you said before. As soon as she received this, she said she suddenly remembered. And not only did she remember that she had planned her own life, she also remembered past lives. And the woman said, see, you also had past lives. And she realized she wasn't just little Nancy Rhines on Earth. She was this expansive consciousness. And yeah, it's like a oneness. It's like everyone, it's like I'm getting the same message from the majority of NDEs. And yeah, right. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. I'm trying to build like a metaphysical picture of, what could be happening.
And the closest thing I can get to what that is from my personal experience, because I honestly have not had a full-blown what I would consider oneness experience, which I know some individuals have had, whether they use psychedelics to get there, or they may have had it in a out-of-body state. I have had just sort of little touches of it, little inklings of it. Some of it is just an expansion that I feel in meditation, but I've also had a bilocation experience where I knew I was in two places at the same time. And to me, that's sort of a taste of what it's like to be one with the all that is, because we still can maintain this individuated sense of identity even after we leave the physical body. I don't think we just sort of dissolve into the ocean of consciousness. I think that the vast majority of people at the stage they're at after leaving an earth life are in developmental stages where they continue to have personality. They continue to essentially be the person they were on earth, in this life, but their perspective begins to open quickly. And so, they may be more connected to that sense of oneness with the whole without losing the sense of identity or individuality. I think a lot of people are afraid that death means the loss of their sense of self. And my experience has been that that's just not the case. That you can experience both at the same time. If that makes sense.
Actually, yeah. I mean, there's this scientist and philosopher, Bernardo Kastrup, and is come up with his model of analytic idealism, but he's very humble about his speculations. And he has actually said that, when you die, you probably relinquish your sense of self, and then you become the mind at large, and you kind of become all knowing, but you probably lose the metacognition that that's a feature of human beings here on earth. You're aware, but you don't know that you're aware, and you just become the mind of nature. So, but and I'm thinking, okay, you're making assumptions based on how far you can go, how far you can see, and you don't want to take the extra step. And he does say, I don't have any experiences with, like lucid dreaming or meditation or anything like that. He does acknowledge that, but I do think that sometimes when they create their hypotheses, they don't want to make the extra step. They want to be respected in academia. So I think he doesn't, but he has said before, it could be the case that we still perceive a sense of identity after after we've, shuffled off our mortal coil. But he said, I can't be sure of that. There could be some other, he's a naturalist, basically. There could be some kind of mechanism that allows for another identity to be perceived, as a conscious observer, and you still retain a sense of self, although, albeit more expanded and more at one with the whole. So I don't know. Yeah.
In my experience, from my perspective, having received information from individuals who had, lives here on earth, and connecting to their family members, is that they stay who they are,
Yeah.
One of my let me tell you two. I've shared these before on other groups, but I'll show you two really quick early experiences of mediumship that I had.
Yeah.
That couldn't have, I didn't know these people. I couldn't have had any idea why I was getting the information I did, but it was validated. The first one was, I was just beginning to look into mediumship and went to go take a little one-day weekend class with a local lady. And I meditated before I left. And in this meditation, I suddenly had a flash of this tall man wearing lederhosen, like German little folk lederhosen type outfit, little jumper type. I know that means something different in the UK than it means here. It's not a sweater, but like a,
Yeah.
And he was playing the piano, had thick, dark rim glasses, and he was trying to make me laugh. And that is the strangest image. Why on earth did that pop into my head? And I just quickly jotted it down in my journal and then went to this class. Well, I sat next to this little tiny lady, dark hair, she looked like she might be Latina, but I just felt like I needed to ask her, does this image that I have mean anything to you? And so I did. I was really going to think I'm crazy, and I described to her this image, and I asked, does that mean anything? And she said, oh yeah. She said, my grandfather was German. He was in vaudeville and he played the piano.
Wow. Wow.
And so I'm like, you're kidding.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this woman from anywhere, but obviously, spirit knew where I was going to be, and I use the term spirit just because that's the kind of the common phraseology, but this grandfather knew where I was going to be and knew who I would sit next to. Wow. Because of his broader perspective, was able to bring me an image that was as much for me as it was for her. Yeah. Because I needed that validation. Wow. But this was something that could be experienced and could be learned, right? Yeah. I believe if you're a human being, you can learn to do this. And I would claim, Arlindo, that your experience is every bit as deep and profound as mine has been. And that you do receive information, right? You don't necessarily have to know who the information's coming from to go, I know that's from outside of myself and that this is helpful to me. Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
The second time, and you might find this one interesting, I was in a book group at a place called the Caritas Center that was held in Boulder, Colorado. And we were reading the Medium's book. So it's a spiritist organization, and they do believe in mediumship and developing it. And again, one day I'm just meditating as I normally did before I left. Well, actually, it was several days before the next book group, but I was just meditating and suddenly I heard a name. Now, names are not a common thing to receive for a lot of mediums. Some get them all the time, but it's not a common thing. And I did not yet consider myself a medium, but I heard a name and it sounded kind of like Bertram. I'm like, well, that's an unusual name. And with this name came the information that this person who sounded like Bertram with the name Bertram was connected to a gentleman in my book group whose name is Malcolm.
Wow.
And not only was he connected to him, he was like a father figure. And not only that, but they looked a lot alike.
Wow.
And so I just, again, write it all down in my journal. And I was like, okay, next time I go this book group, I'm going to dig up the courage. It's about reading about mediumship and developing it. Surely Malcolm is going to understand and be okay with me asking him about this. So sure enough, I went the next week and said, Malcolm, you're going to think I'm crazy. But did you know someone with a name that sounds like Bertram who would have been like a father figure to you? And he thought for just a brief moment, he said, well, not Bertram, Bertrand.
Oh, right.
And I'm like,
Bertrand.
oh, that's close enough.
Yeah.
And he said, do you know who Bertrand Russell is? And I did. I mean, like I had an idea. I knew he was a British philosopher, mathematician, writer, so I kind of had an idea about him, but I couldn't remember what he looked like at all. And I said, he was like a father figure. And he said, oh, absolutely. He said, I was a member of Bertrand Russell Committee of 100 back in the 60s. It was an anti-nuclear protest group.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's amazing. But then I'm like, oh, but he's not related. There's no way they look alike. I'm not going to even say that. I'm like, I didn't tell him that the information about them looking alike came through. And I ran to my car after that meeting and looked up a picture of Bertrand Russell, and I nearly fell out of my car.
Yeah.
They could have been father and son, brothers, the same person practically. With the high cheekbones and the hooked nose and the, kind of sharp jawline, kind of slightly crazy hair.
Yeah. Absolutely.
They just looked so similar, even though they weren't, genetically related as far as I know.
Yeah.
So those two experiences were really convincing to me that not only could you receive information, but that you could actually connect to the individual. Bertrand Russell has actually popped in on my meditations, somewhat frequently since then. I mean, not all the time.
Because he struggled with metaphysics throughout his life. He changed his mind so many times, between,
right.
Psychism, materialism.
At best, he was agnostic, right? I mean, he certainly had a lot of things to say about religion and those kinds of things. So yes, I mean, interesting that he, of course, now has a different perspective, at least as far as I can see. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I would have never expected, someone known to show up for me that way. But it was wonderful validation.
It's quite remarkable, definitely. I was going to say you're also into tarot reading, and I'm wondering if there's a relationship between cartomancy and synchronicities. If it's also a way to convey information, to let you know things that you couldn't possibly know conventionally. If it's kind of like a system that transcends space and time and stuff like that.
Yes. Well, and of course, and especially if you've got a background with Jung, that, tarot is a system of archetypes. And so there's a lot of information in every individual, image within a system like that. And I found very quickly, I started to work with tarot simply because I'd read somewhere that it was an easy way to begin to tap into your own intuition. And
Right.
so I thought, well, let's give it a try. If nothing, I'm a good student, right? And I'll give it a shot and see what happens. And holy cow,
Yeah.
if it wasn't true,
Yeah.
we say picture's worth 1,000 words. And so even though one individual image may have a multitude of meanings, it's your intuition that tells you which of those meanings is important for the information that you're hoping to receive, right?
Yeah.
And so definitely I call using tarot playing in the matrix,
Right. Yeah.
because you're just using a tool of an archetypal system to get you to deeper levels of information.
Yeah.
And yes, the synchronicity of what card shows up at any given time is important, but sometimes you could get any number of different cards that would give you the same information
Yeah.
because intuitively you know where it's going.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, you touched upon meaning. And I think in this reality, you definitely can't escape meaning because even if you believe that there's no intrinsic meaning to reality, if you're like a nihilist, that's still what reality means to you. So you can't escape meaning. And I actually remember playing with soul cards years ago uh, with my mum and her friends. And my mum has always been more into spiritualism than I am. And I'm only starting to really look deeply into this now. Um, and sometimes I clashed with my mum, in the past when I was a materialist. But yeah, when we tried these soul cards, I found it remarkable how accurate they were at the time. And even though I just dismissed it as some extraordinary coincidence, I thought, okay, it's just a coincidence. It's just a coincidence. And it kept happening again and again. And yeah, again, it's one of those things that in the back of my mind was niggling at me. It's like, what's going on here? This is not fitting my materialist paradigm. And especially when so many experts at the time, maybe not so much now because it's all coming out now. Idealism is now popular again. But back then, I thought these experts, these people who obviously know more than me, are saying that this isn't true. Spirits don't exist, that there's nothing to soul cards or tarot reading. It can't happen. It doesn't fit with their models. Obviously now I know that the maps that they have isn't the territory. That's what the mistake that they were making. But yeah, at the time I was like, oh, what's going on here? It kept niggling at me, and now I realize, looking back, uh they were just closed-minded or just following the norm, the just following what the majority say and what's acceptable in academia. Now I realize that, and now I'm much more open to these experiences than ever before. So I guess I was still a bit dismissive back then, but something in the back of my mind was saying, no, there's something here. It's like saying you should really explore it for yourself. You should really yeah.
Well, and if it had turned out to, be not a useful tool, I would have dropped it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact is that it proved over and over and over again, we are natural storytellers. And the story helps us to create the meaning, right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing that any kind of card reading or other archetypal system helps us to do, is to tell the story. And but it is our personal intuition. It's not the cards themselves, right? There's no
Yeah.
magic in a tarot card.
Yeah.
There's not. It's a picture on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
The magic is us, right? We are the conscious, intuitive,
That's right. Yeah,
being
that
that
makes
is
sense.
utilizing a tool, yeah, in order to help us, in whatever form of expansion we're working on.
Yeah.
So I do love teaching at this point in my life. I am a teacher by background. I taught high school art for a number of years, but
Right.
I would much rather teach someone to tap into their own intuition or to connect to their own loved ones on the other side than I would be to do a reading for them. And I still do readings periodically, but if I can, I will always convince somebody, let me teach you how to do this instead, because it is part of our human nature. It is a capacity within all of us. Now, do some people come at it more easily than others? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just like there's, basketball players that are naturally good at basketball, and there's mathematicians that are naturally good at math, but it doesn't mean you can't learn to play basketball or you can't learn to do math.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so I don't consider myself, a star,
Oh, me
intuitive.
neither. Yeah.
But at the same time, I know that I have a natural inherent capacity for it, because if we are all consciousness at our core, and you can call that consciousness, spirit, or whatever you want. But if we are all consciousness at our core, then if we can communicate with another consciousness here on Earth, why can't we communicate with consciousness outside of this physical 3D reality?
Yeah, that's right.
And I claim we can, because we are so much more than what is embodied.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was this French philosopher called Henri Bergson. I don't know if you've heard of him. And
I don't think so.
If you had met him, you probably would have liked him. He said that immediate experience and intuition are more important than abstract rationalism and science for explaining reality. And he was basically what people would call today a vitalist. And he came up with the term, he coined it, the term élan vital, which I think it means vital spark, the vital spark of life, which is, he likens to consciousness. He said it's related to consciousness, but it's what drives life in evolution. And I'm wondering if what do you think about the distinction between, because obviously he was into these things, and I'm wondering, what do you think about the distinction between living beings, living life forms, and say inanimate objects? I tend to think of them as there's the dreamer and then there's the dreamed. And I know it's kind of like a duality, but then this duality somehow converges and it's all just one thing.
Yeah. And you know what? That's something that I don't know if I've had enough evidence one way or the other to have a hard feeling about it. I accept that at least the mystics have said there is consciousness in everything, including the inanimate, objects. And I have had a bit of, I'll just say, interaction with what I consider, Mother Earth,
Right.
as a conscious entity, right? As a consciousness.
Yeah.
And so, I may not think about the earth itself as being conscious, but most people who have accepted, their own intuitive experiences, their own mediumistic experiences, will say, yep, I've done that as well. I've connected in with the spirit of earth, and they'll have very similar descriptions of what that experience was like. So to me, that's a little bit of extra validation, right? So I think we know that matter is energy, right? And that's what we see as physical, or what we perceive as solid
That's
matter,
right. Yeah.
right? Is kind of the collapse of the wave function. Right? The collapse of the potential into the material. And I'm not a great, I'm a kind of a lay physicist, person.
No,
I have an interest in it, but I can't do the math. But we have heard from our greater physicist, our quantum mechanic physicist, that reality is popping in and out all the time. Like it's shifting between the potential and the collapse of that wave function into the particle, like over and over and over and over again, ongoing.
It has no
And
set
so,
existence. Yeah. Or
right,
standalone
right.
existence. Yeah, yeah,
Or
that's right.
at least not in this physical vibratory state that we're experiencing, right?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least not in this physical world, that it comes and goes in and out, but it happens rapidly enough that we feel it as continuous,
Yeah.
that there's continuity to the solidity of my desk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because it's happening so quickly. It's much like watching a film strip.
Yeah.
And so all of those, pictures exist on the film all at one time, but it's only the watching them in sequence that creates the sense of space and motion and, all of the things that come with it. And
Yeah.
so my suspicion is that this illusion that we call physical reality, and I will say it is a real experience. It might be an illusion, but it's a real experience.
Experience. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but that it's kind of like watching that film strip, right? And that we achieved the sense of time because of the succession of this experience, in sequence.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
creates the sense of time for us.
That's right.
So I'm okay with being proven wrong on these things, but that's what makes sense to me now.
I think you're on the
That's
right track, to be fair. And really, if we really scale down to the roots of reality as far as we can go, we start to realize that physicalism, materialism makes no sense. At the end of the day, matter is just a concept. All we have is experiences, and when you scale down, you start to realize, atoms are mostly empty space. Even the nucleus is just invisible forces in motion. We don't know what's moving, so it's very fuzzy, and it starts to look more like a dream. And actually, I'm reminded of NDE cases where people, because they still have a focus of consciousness, and they can see their bodies, and the doctor's trying to save them. And some people actually report noticing that they're not just at one location. It's almost like a by location, like you said, they're not just where they are, but and they're invisible to everyone else, but they also start to feel like they're the wood of the chairs and tables, and the concrete of the walls. And
right.
there was a person who actually had this sensation like, oh, I'm actually everything. It's like I can feel everything, all these objects. It's just I'm creating this, and that's so weird. That's really strange,
Yeah.
and it makes me think, because I've delved into Advaita Vedanta, and I came across Adi Shankara, who's a mystic that lived centuries ago, and he had this clay pot analogy where clay is basically mind, and the pots and any object that you can make out of clay, they're just illusions that we give names to, like all these objects, including our bodies, they're just illusions. So we term them as unreal. And he
Right.
said, the only real thing is the clay, because the clay
Right.
persists and never changes throughout. And all
Right.
these objects, they come out of the clay, but there's only clay. There was only ever clay. There was only ever mind. And I
Mind.
found that quite profound. And it seems to tie in with some of these NDE reports that I've been reading about, and people start to realize, oh, I'm actually not just a person. Oh, I'm expanding. I feel like I'm also these objects in the room, and a lot of the times they can read people's minds, like even the doctor's thoughts, and the doctors confirm those thoughts. It's like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed. This patient actually knew what I was doing and what I was thinking at the time. So it's almost like one mind. It's like on the verge of death, you end up becoming privy to more information, and you
Right.
expand and you reach out to other minds, because on some level it's just one consciousness. But and
Exactly.
yeah, plays into the filtration
Well,
theory.
well,
Again,
well,
yeah,
and the only thing that I was going to say is that it can be both. You can be individuated and one at the same time, which is
yeah,
why I look at all of this for sure as a consensus reality. Like I acknowledge your individuated point of conscious awareness, which is both me and not me,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
that's right.
both of those things.
Yeah,
So while we are one, we also can still be individuated. And
that's
it's a
right.
hard concept to wrap our minds around. And I don't know that we have language for all of
Yeah,
this,
that's the thing.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it was Kafka who said language is a poor translation, and I think that's true. Obviously, I experience you as a separate person. You know, you have your
Right.
own mind, um, but then if we're going to say that that's an illusion of separateness, it's real as an experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's very
And
hard to
so,
convey that.
right, because otherwise people might fall into the idea that, which might be a little narcissistic in nature, that, you know, I'm the only one having this experience, that all the people around me, all the animals and plants and, are something I created.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that that's the nature of reality. I feel like,
Me too.
your
Yeah.
consciousness is absolutely an individuated expression of the whole.
Yeah.
And we can merge, on a conscious level under certain conditions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
but at least for this experience, we're here to experience duality. We're here to experience the other, you know,
Yeah.
uh, as separate from ourselves, because there's expansion in that experience. There's growth in that experience. A lot of people talk about Earth as being a school, and I'm okay with. I mean, I'm a teacher, so I like that concept.
Yeah.
I'm not absolutely sure that's exactly what it is. I think it's a great way of looking at things,
Yeah.
but I think it's more about just experience, you
Me
know?
too. Me too. I mean, you can look at it through the lens of learning things. I mean,
Right.
obviously, life's events can certainly teach you things, but I really do think it's all about experience, and definitely experience is primary. In fact, it's synonymous with consciousness. I really do
Conscious.
think
Right.
it all comes back to just an experience, and it brings back to mind. Uh, Again, it was this guy who nearly drowned, and he ended up going to the light. And he said when he went in the light, everything was bright white, and there were other beings there, and he was having this party there, full of joy, and he's so happy. And the light said to him, you know, it's almost like the light had a sense of humor. He said, you take life too seriously, like that. It's almost like it was telling him to just let go. It's just an experience. And then as he progressed, um, after the party, they went on to explore other worlds. And he said, like, whatever question he had, immediately an answer came to him. And that's also like quite a common feature in NDEs. It like just came to him. He said it's almost like he was moving towards omniscience, and reality was revealing itself to him. And then obviously it wasn't his choice. He was told you have to go back, and then he came away transformed. And so many people who have NDEs come away from them transformed. Their perspective on life changes completely. So
Exactly.
radical transformation.
And sometimes the energetics around them change completely as well. They open up what you would consider psychic ability or mediumistic ability, or maybe suddenly they burn out all the batteries in their watches, or something changes with them on an energetic level
Yeah,
when they've had that. Because I think that's because that consciousness is forced to expand in the experience of a near death experience. In
yeah,
in that instance, they experience this sudden expansion that doesn't completely go away just because they came back to their bodies.
yeah. It's almost like
And
they come back divinely inspired, and it's like, oh, now they're
right.
open to much more. Yeah,
And so many people who experience those things do feel compelled to share what
Yeah.
they've experienced and to kind of tell the world. I mean, a lot of people will hold it back, again, out of fear more often than not, of being ridiculed or thought crazy or, whatever. But generally, even years later, it is still as fresh in their mind, as real to them as if it had happened the day before.
Yeah.
And very often they'll then begin to share. It's great that we are living in a time now, not only where near-death experiences are much more common because we're so much better at bringing the physical body back into a functional state,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
we have a culture that's much, much more accepting of it. And not only that, but they're actually craving that information and
Yeah.
they want to hear those experiences.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I actually, the other day I was watching a video, it's one of those videos where Alan Watts makes a speech, and in the speech, he he talks about the nature of reality. He makes observations as he normally does as a philosopher and mystic, or did. Sorry, he's passed away.
Right.
But he also mentioned something that isn't very talked about in the realm of psychology, and I looked it up after he mentioned it. He said that babies have this oceanic feeling, and it's actually a real term in psychology, oceanic feeling. And he was saying that babies actually know their true nature, and before they actually perceive themselves as an agent in the world. So they have this oceanic feeling like they're in the entire world, they're expanded, everything is just them, it's just the world doing its own thing. They know exactly where they're from. But then they unlearn that and they begin to learn who they are in the world. And this again, the illusion of separateness comes in, and there's mom and dad and other people around them, other agents that it's beyond their control, and they begin to mature into that frame of mind, and the oceanic feeling dissipates. That's it, it's gone. And I find that very, very interesting. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I was going to say that we know that children
yeah,
very frequently remember other lives, other incarnations. And I
right,
don't even
yeah,
like the word past lives because to me that's very linear and linear language doesn't kind of get us there. But they
yeah,
remember other incarnations. And typically, if they're going to talk about those things, they do it before the age of 5.
yeah,
And then about that age, they start going to school, they start, experiencing themselves in a little more of outside the world kind of places like school and friends and that sort of thing,
yeah,
and they slowly start to forget. And that's what I call the veil. I do
yeah,
have a little Facebook group called The Thinning Veil, and the
right,
veil is not a physical structure. It is, we are the veil, like,
yeah,
and I would say perhaps the physical body itself is the veil,
yeah,
um because again it's a filter
yeah, bit
for
like, yeah, yeah,
consciousness.
the filter of the brain. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah,
And so as the body matures and as they become conditioned by, what's around them, whether they begin to forget, and I think that's usually what we think of as the veil, is this forgetting of who we really are and what we may have experienced, previously.
yeah,
Or, again, that's linear language, but we'll use it because it's what we have.
yeah,
Um, then they start to become more embodied in this experience,
yeah,
and they do tend to forget it over time.
yeah.
So
It's
that,
like waking up to a new dream. I actually liken it to like when you wake up in the morning, and you wake up and you realize, oh, what I just experienced was only a dream, and all the memories come to you. Oh yeah, I know who I am. You might even feel like you're someone else in the dream, and you have different memories. But then you wake up and you realize, oh, I'm me in the world. We say waking life, right? But it's almost like waking up to another dream, a more persistent dream, and
convincing. Yeah.
yeah, more convincing. And then the more
Yeah.
we go about our day, if we don't write down our dreams, we might forget. It might be completely gone. And I'm wondering, yeah, it's almost analogous to what's going on with cases of reincarnation, and it's usually children who report these, these memories. It's
Exactly.
yeah, it seems to fit it. It's almost like we say as above, so below, or as in the dream, as in waking life. It has that feel, doesn't it? It's almost like
Yeah.
it matches. Yeah,
Well, and when you're in a dream, I mean, granted, unless it's like a nightmare or something and you're experiencing fear, I mean, you don't question that reality in the dream any more than you question it here. Unless
yeah,
perhaps you've become lucid in the dream,
lucid.
which,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it's another experience of being aware of dreaming.
yeah.
Um,
But normally
but
you don't question. Yeah,
right. And that I would claim that those dream states are also real
yeah,
experiences, right? Maybe not base reality, but they're real experience. And so I love the dream state. I also there's a sweet spot just as you start to fall asleep and just as you're coming out of sleep, that hypnagogic, hypnopompic
that's right. Yeah,
phase where you are open to all kinds of communication and information. I often, if I have a spirit pop in for me that wants me to connect with a family member for them, they'll pop in at that little in between state just before falling asleep, but more commonly just as I'm waking up. And I've
yeah.
had whole conversations with the people in that state,
Oh,
and
right.
it's a vibrational, it's both an energetic, I will say spiritual state, but it's a physical state as well because our brain is a filter.
Yeah,
We know that the brain has different vibratory states, theta and beta and alpha and gamma and all of those things. And most people who work at developing their intuition or developing mediumship recognize that they are getting into an altered state of mind. It's a shift in the vibratory state, not only of sort of our spiritual self, but our physical self as well. I mean, it reads on
yeah,
electronic equipment, right? You can find out what brain state you're predominantly in
yeah,
um, by measuring it.
yeah. That's right.
And we know that these experiences very often happen in the theta state is very common.
Yeah,
Of course, the gamma state, which they thought human beings couldn't even get into until they started testing, Buddhist monks and
yeah,
realized, oh, yeah, no, people experience that one too. And
yeah,
so, all of these different vibratory states are what give us access to those more expanded states of consciousness. And you can develop it. It's a learnable skill,
I think
like
I'm going
learning
to
to
look
tie your
into this
shoes.
because every time I find myself in the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state, I sometimes get freaked out by voices, calling my name or it's
Yep.
something weird, and it's like, oh my god. But I think I'm gonna be brave and look into it and spend more time in that state rather than because often if I get something weird in this state, then I think, okay, this is the time when I should roll over and out of the body or turn it into a dream scene and then do my own thing, and I already have my own plan of action for doing what I want to do in the dream. But I think I'm going to try to be more receptive of these states and just see what comes, just be open to the information rather than just make an assessment or getting
Yeah.
freaked out by what's coming through.
But even when I first experienced because I did practice some out of body, activities in order to try to experience out of body states fairly early on in my journey. And the first time I experienced a vibrational state, I don't know if you've had that where your whole body seems to be,
Yeah,
like
that's
you're
right.
laying
Yeah,
on train tracks, right?
yeah,
Of course, it took me forever to get past that because it freaked me out every time.
yeah, yeah,
But the fact is that you're safe. I mean, you are
yeah,
because, well, I say that. I mean, you're not going to die for one. That experience is not going to be the thing that kills you, right?
yeah. I'll tell you something.
Physically, your physical body, but you're going to exist no matter what.
Yeah,
So when you
that's right.
come to that absolute conviction, you don't worry about whether or not your physical body survives at some point, other than
Yeah.
you really enjoy the experience of being here, right? But
Yeah.
you'll know that you continue.
Yeah. I was going to say, when I experience this vibrational state, I often feel like it's an electric current through my body. It literally makes me shake. I've have the experience of shaking, like, and sometimes it feels like it's going through my spine. And I often hear a strange noise, which is like, is it a Doppel machine? You know, the machine that measures the baby's hearts. It's like a,
Right.
I literally hear this, and I feel something there going, and it starts speeding up. And then
Yeah.
I start feeling this electricity through my body. And I don't know if you know anything about chakras or
Yeah.
kundalini. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
related to that, but it makes me
Well,
think, oh, is there something to those things?
I would say it's related to it. I can't claim to have ever had a full-on Kundalini experience either, though I've certainly had the vibratory, thing when you're going out of body, right?
Yeah,
But I do get a lot of physical sensation. So as a medium, have a lot of what's called clairsentience. So I'll get chills, I'll get pressure in my head. Sometimes it is here. Very often it's back here. And I feel like this is where information comes to me. If I'm gonna
yeah,
give it direction, right? It comes from here. Um, I will sometimes feel, if I really am doing mediumship for somebody, and I will get physical sensations around the way someone passed. So for example, when I've had somebody who maybe died from a drug overdose, I will feel kind of dizzy and lightheaded and a little
yeah.
nauseous, right?
Right.
Or, chest tightness if it's, something heart or lung related, that sort of thing. Um, so to answer your question, yes, I think it's related. We've definitely got energy centers related to our physical body. How or if that translates to what we are, you know, after this
Yeah,
experience, this physical experience, I don't know for sure.
yeah,
Um, I know that we can still experience a body, and a lot of near-death experiencers will say, I looked down and I, saw my feet, or like they'll tell you the things that they feel like they experience, including having a body. Sometimes they don't always.
sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes they experience themselves as a point of consciousness or a ball of light or
That's right.
whatever they
Yeah,
happen to experience. And I think all of those are valid, and all of
yeah,
those are within the realm of, you know, what we can experience. And
what
that's
we
why
can,
I
yeah,
say that a lot of people still experience a physical existence after they leave this world.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Even as a subjective experience, it still carries on.
right,
Yeah, it might
right.
actually be difficult to get rid of the entire ego. It's not like ego dissolution. There might be something that still is there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Other than maybe for some of the most advanced, I'll say,
yeah,
individuals, I would say most people still retain quite a bit of their ego
yeah.
afterwards.
So you don't
I
you
mean, I
don't get
think
like a nirvana straight away, like a Tibetan Buddhist monk. you know?
not from my experience.
No. Yeah,
And I think that it might be the goal. I don't know.
yeah.
Um, but I do
Maybe.
know,
Yeah,
yeah, I do know I've had a lot of information come through from what are called collectives. And you'll hear that among a lot of people who do trance channeling or, those kinds of things. They'll have, there might be a single entity that sort of speaks for a group
yeah. I had a
that essentially is
cursory
coming
look on your
through.
channel. You interviewed a lady that was into trance channeling. What was her name?
I've had, well, probably Elaine Thorpe was one of the more recent ones that we've
Yeah,
had, but
yeah.
I've
That's
had,
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So I was
we've
curious
had
about that. I was like,
several.
hmm.
Yeah, well, she's really interesting if we're talking about Elaine Thorpe, because she has such a dramatic change, not only in her vocal quality, which goes from this very soft spoken, very sweet British woman,
Yeah,
to this very erudite, you know, much deeper voice male.
Right.
whose name is Jonathan. And this may be getting off the topic of your channel,
No, that's fine.
but from
Today it's going to be about, even if people think it's new age, I don't care. I'm really going to explore this with an open mind now.
yeah.
And if you start
So
talking about, channeling and, Seth type of stuff, I've heard stuff. So yeah, I mean,
I've
go
got
ahead and yeah.
Seth is coming up soon on my channel. Just stay tuned.
All
There's a
right, there you go.
synchronicity for you. And I have a story around him too.
Oh,
But
brilliant.
with the lane, from what I understand, is that there is something called ectoplasm, and I have had some experience around it, not of my own creation, but around what are called physical mediums.
Right.
And from what I understand with Elaine is her throat is coated with this substance. And that then allows the voice to become the voice of her guide who speaks
Right.
through her.
Yeah,
And it's a fascinating thing to watch and experience.
it really is.
And yeah, and I know that a lot of people, will say, oh, that's, if they've got a religious belief, oh, that's the devil, that's,
Yeah.
whatever. And it's crazy because the messages that come through are all love and light and,
Yeah,
kindness and,
that's
you
right.
know,
I'm trying to
really
look at this
high
free of
vibrational
flippant
information.
ideas. Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
So listen to the message, and then you'll know what the
yeah,
source is.
absolutely. You mentioned ectoplasm, and I was it a documentary or a series based on the real life events of the most haunted house in Britain or in England, and basically this house was haunted, and it was so bad. It's basically the case of a poltergeist. And every time something was about to happen, it didn't just happen to the family. Anyone who went into the house to investigate, to explore what was going on, every time something was about to happen, an object was about to move by itself, uh, people were also slapped outside of the family who went in there to investigate. They were slapped and they found, finger marks on their faces and stuff like that. It's really strange, scary stuff. And basically, they reckon it was the spirit of a friar who was really bad, and he was molesting kids when he was alive, and a girl in the family, she actually received a communication, and she saw the ghost of a little girl who was saying, who was actually trying to save her because the friar was trying to do something bad to her. And yeah, anyway, the family members and people who visited the house and saw for themselves that this was real, they all reported the temperature going down. A decrease in temperature. They felt cold, steam coming out of their mouths, and then
Yep.
This would happen. So and then it's not just that case. I seem to hear this from a lot of people who report paranormal experiences, poltergeist, and that type of stuff. And I'm thinking, is there something going on that, I mean, are these spirits changing the temperature of the room to allow themselves to manifest, or as they're trying to manifest it, literally changes the temperature of the room, like the physics of it allows them to come through? What's going on here? Do you know anything about that?
I have some thoughts around it, and I have some things that I've read about it, and it makes good sense to me. Very often, when there's true poltergeist activity, there is a young, undeveloped physical medium in the house, usually an adolescent or young adult.
Right.
And so it tends to be focused around, I've got chills as I'm saying this, so to me, that's validation. It seems to be focused around usually a young person, maturing young person, um, because they have sort of a natural energetic capacity for helping this stuff to manifest. And they don't often have no idea, it's not
Yeah.
anything they've even heard of before. But with regard to sort of the malevolent behavior, people are still people even after they die.
Yeah.
right? I said they don't really change a great deal just because they've left their body. Their
Yeah. Yeah.
conscious, awareness is not so dramatically shifted, especially if they're, I'll just say, unevolved, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
my best way of putting it. And so they may still crave things they craved when they were here. They may still, have the same general malevolent outlook that they had in life. And we know you don't want to hang out with everybody on earth. Not everybody is your cup of tea. And
Yeah.
somebody you want to, you can, I believe in loving, your
Yeah.
neighbor, but at the same time, you can love your neighbor from a distance and not
Yeah. That's
participate,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, people, just because you're disembodied doesn't mean that you've suddenly become all-knowing, godlike, and kind and loving. And
Yeah.
so, an unknowing physical medium or undeveloped physical medium can have things like poltergeist activity happen around them. Um,
Wow.
and it can be, in the past, other cultures recognized that when these things occurred, that individual was their next shaman, right? That
Right.
individual was their next spiritual teacher. And they then developed them and
Yeah.
helped them to learn how to set boundaries and to, you know, uh, control that experience in a more meaningful, useful way.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas culturally, we've lost that.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of times these kids then get institutionalized, or they, are told that there's something wrong with them, or they learn to hide it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. That's
and those are the natural mediums, right? I don't necessarily claim that I'm a natural medium. I'm a taught medium,
yeah.
or I'm a developed medium, right? But some people do come in with a natural capacity, and if they're not in an environment that helps them to understand what they're experiencing, it can go all kinds of sideways.
Yeah. Have you seen the film Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore?
Yeah, because I'm also a ceramic artist as well as other forms of art. So
Right.
people brought that movie up to me all the time.
Right. Because there's a scene where the character Sam Wheat is dead, and he's trying to
Right,
move objects and he can't, and then there's this other ghost that haunts the the trains and the train station, and
right,
is teaching him how to move objects because it's not easy for them. And then he starts saying, "You think you have that body? You think you have those clothes? It's a different game now. It's all mind." And
right.
he says, "Use all your emotion." And then he finally manages to move a trainer, I think it was. And I'm wondering if something like that is going on for real, but harder than what the film shows, or maybe the film, there's some truth to what the film shows,
Yes.
like, but it's not as easy for people from the other side to communicate with us, especially not easy for them to move objects. But then
Right.
you look at poltergeists, and it seems like these entities, let's say, they seem to be powerful enough to move several objects at the same time. They can even injure people.
Yeah.
Uh, and it just makes me think, what enables that entity to be able to do that, but not the loved ones, our deceased loved ones who were actually not malevolent, normal people,
Right.
good people.
I would claim our deceased loved ones can, if
And
they
okay.
have the desire to learn, and they do. Like, I shared a video just recently, and I can't remember the lady's name. You can certainly see it. I
Yeah.
shared it on the Thinning Veil group, but of a woman who was basically cleaning around her son's grave, and she has a little wind, like wind, what is it? Like a pinwheel
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
that's next to his grave. And there's no wind. You can see it's dead still. The grass is not moving. The trees are not moving. And she asked her son to turn the wheel for her. and the wheel starts to turn. And she asks her son to stop, and it stops. And she
Wow.
asks him to turn it again, and it turns again. And so they can, because I think you continue to learn. Just because you've dropped a body, you don't stop learning. And if you
Yeah.
have an interest in learning to do those things as a disembodied individual, you can learn. I know my son has learned some ways to communicate since he left. I've
Yeah.
received EVPs from him. And I think that's a skill that had to be learned, because I didn't receive them early on. They received them much later. And again, we're talking about time here, which
Yeah.
is, but I think
Electronic voice phenomena, isn't it?
yes, electronic voice phenomena and other forms of instrumental transcommunication I have also had come through. And so those are things that are learnable and can be learned once you leave the physical body. I would claim you can probably even learn to do them while you're still in the physical body. We know that telekinesis and those kinds of things can be done and have been studied.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not a physical activity.
No.
That's an energetic activity.
Yeah.
Right. So if embodied human beings can do it,
Yeah.
disembodied human beings can also do it.
And it goes back to everything being energy, vibrations.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right. I was going to ask you, in your experience, what do you think is the most effective way to communicate with deceased people? I mean, would you say EVP, or maybe lucid dreaming, or even Ouija boards? I mean, or is that risky?
Yeah, I think
I know my
everybody's
wife
different.
wouldn't have a Ouija board in the house.
Right. Well, and I will admit, I know people who use Ouija boards, or what they'll call spirit boards, very safely and effectively. I haven't picked one up because I know that I have fear based on my upbringing around them. And so you don't want to go into anything with fear, right? Because then you're automatically have a weak boundary.
Right. It's
And
a bit
so
like taking a psychedelic drug. You have to be in the right frame of mind. People always say this.
right.
If you're going to take magic mushrooms or LSD, you have to be surrounded by people you're comfortable with, and you have to be in the right state of mind. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad trip. Yeah.
Right.
It must be similar
Yeah.
to that. Yeah.
I'm assuming it is. I haven't done any of those, psychedelic type things, but I would be interested under the right circumstances, just for experience. I'm all about experience.
Yeah.
Where was I going with this?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. But yeah, it is all energetic, and it is things that can be learned. And I think we continue to learn after we leave the physical. Oh, with regard to, can anybody do any of these things? I think with enough focus and enough intention, sure, why not?
Yeah.
I do think we have specific talents and skills that we will learn quicker and more easily. So like I said, I tend to be very clairsentient. I get a lot of physical sensations. I tend to be very clairaudient. I hear things. And then I'm also fairly clairvoyant. I will see images, but I don't see people like standing in front of me like I might see you, right? It's a mind's eye thing for me. Whereas some people can see spirit standing in front of them, right? My own father saw people attending their own funerals.
Wow.
So, he was probably the most truly clairvoyant person I have known in life. He's now on the other side, but he would share those cautiously experiences with us, because to him that was evidence that not only do we continue, does our conscious awareness continue, but we remain interested in our earth families and the people who loved us, and we'll show up for our own funerals. Right.
We better make sure we play the right songs at their funerals, because they might be watching.
Yeah. I mean, and some people might really continue to care, right? And then others will let go of it pretty quickly. Right. But you're right. If you've got a very controlling aunt in life, she's probably still going to want some of that control for her funeral when the time comes, right?
They don't stop being themselves, basically.
Right, exactly.
They might have a new perspective, obviously. I mean, in a way, we kind of change gradually throughout our lives, and some people have experiences that completely change them. but we're still us, basically.
We are still
We're
us.
still that conscious observer, and as long as we have our memories, we are going to have opinions based on those memories. And if we remember our lives and our loved ones, and we know
Right.
what's going on, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And that might be a whole
Personality.
nother interesting conversation is, memory and where is memory located?
Yes,
That's
yes,
a whole
that's
nother
right.
topic.
That's a whole other
Yeah.
topic. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm more open to the Akashic records than I've ever been. I mean, the word Akasha is obviously, like a sky, the
Right.
ether. And
Right.
I mean, physics is telling us that there's no real empty space. It's all like quantum fluctuations, the quantum foam, and it's all one unified field. So I really do think that they're not stored in the brain. I think they are stored in the ether, in maybe the as Castro would put it, the mind at large, and
Right.
they can be accessed by us. And because what's that phenomenon called, where people who suffer with dementia and Alzheimer's, they suddenly have a
Oh,
moment of lucidity. It's like the lucidity.
terminal lucidity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Terminal lucidity.
Terminal lucidity, yeah.
Mhm.
And there's no explanation for that. It's almost like on the verge of death, suddenly all those memories and all those connections just manifest, and they remember
Right.
everything, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the brain.
Where there's no materialist explanation for
Explanation, yeah. There's no materialist
that.
explanation.
Right. Because if we were only our brains, the brain has broken down to the point of death,
Yeah,
for those individuals. And, all the plaque and the things that, create dementia in the physical body.
yeah.
It can't just suddenly reverse at the very end of life if we are only the product of our brains.
That's right. And these experiences seem to lend credit to the filtration theory of consciousness. That the brain is just like, actually, I don't know if you've heard of Bernardo Kastrup. He likens the brain to a knot. So everything's mind, and the brain is like a knot in the medium of mind, and and basically it's like he likens it to, I know like analogies can only take you so far, but he's got this analogy where there's the ocean, it's all water, and we're like whirlpools, and the brain is like a whirlpool, and but practically there's only water, really.
Right. Right.
The whirlpool isn't just one entity separate from the rest. It's just the ocean doing its own thing.
Right.
And
Right.
he says that a fully functional brain will filter in some information from the broader, from that sea, that expansive sea,
Right.
but most of it out. So it only filters in the information necessary to for the whirlpool to survive, and to
Right.
self-preserve, right? So when
Right.
you're dead, basically that disperses, and you become like the mind at large. It's like you're the Atman, and then you realize that you're Brahman. It's something along those lines.
Right.
And the brain, all its connections, he comes up with another analogy. The brain is a bit like footprints, and then he says the footprints isn't the walking, right? We shouldn't assume that the footprints give rise to the walking. The footprints are only evidence for the walking, and he says correlation isn't necessarily causation, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah,
And that's where science falls down a lot, is they want to claim that the correlation is the causation.
causation, yeah, yeah.
And they're just missing a whole a whole nother level
That's
of
right. Yeah,
but it's based in that idea that everything is material in nature and everything rises from the material. And honestly, for a long time, I toyed with those materialist concepts as well. I don't know that I've ever fully been a materialist, but when I left the religion of my childhood behind, that was the closest that I came,
yeah,
right? To going, well, I like science. I believe in science. I, you know, I want to understand what science can tell us for these same perennial questions that we've been talking about this whole
Yeah,
time, right? What
that's
is
right.
base reality? Who are we? Where are we going? What's
Yeah,
my purpose in life? And that can't arise from the material. From everything that I have experienced and learned and seen,
yeah.
the material is the illusion,
Yeah. Yeah, and I've
Um,
realized this. I mean, I've realized that materialism is only an assumption about reality. I mean, you get the scientific data and then you make an assumption. You make it an assumption about how reality is, but your assumption isn't necessarily what reality is telling you. There could be so many other things. It's like the voice on the radio. The voice on the radio, it seems to be coming from the radio, and it correlates with the the electromagnetic oscillations in the circuitry. But
mhm,
the voice is being transmitted from somewhere else, and it's
right,
correlated, and it looks like the circuitry is producing the voice, but in actual fact, it's
right,
not. And
right.
yeah.
And
So
you've got to have a working radio, right? So
yeah,
if one of your transistors gets busted, you're not going to get a clear signal anymore. And the same thing is true for the brain. Science will say, oh, but look, if I damage this part of the brain, it affects this function. If I damage this part of the brain, it affects this other function. And so we know that, the frontal lobe does most of the thinking, and the hippocampus, deals with,
yeah,
the things that it deals with, right? And so they feel like they've mapped that out, and
yeah,
that's their evidence for why consciousness arises from the brain. But
yeah.
if the brain is only a radio, then you can bust a radio and it's not going to get a clear signal.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's why, you know,
And
damage to the
hence why you get
physical.
these brain deficits. I mean, if
Right,
the brain's like an oculus and you're playing the game, well, you're not going to be playing the game very well if you damage the oculus. And,
right.
you have to take the oculus out, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I can't really play the game properly.
And the game analogies are great. The fact
Yeah.
that we have video games at this point in time,
Yeah.
uh, you know, has really video games, movies, all of these forms of technology have really broadened our ability to conceive of what conscious existence is.
Yeah.
Because any kid playing a game knows that he's not the character he's playing. He may be fully invested in it in the time that he's playing, right? He may be fully invested in the story and the action and the activity, but as soon as that character dies off, he knows he's not that character.
Yeah. He knows he's not the character. Absolutely. And actually, I don't know if you've heard of Donald Hoffman, and he's got this interface theory of consciousness, and from which he derives his conscious realism, and that partly influenced the name of my podcast. I call it experiential realism, and he basically likens reality to a game, and yeah, so he likens it to a game, and then you have your headset. If you damage the headset, you can't play the game properly. But you may become, if you take off the headset at death, he says, you most likely become privy to the wider reality. And he likens scientists to kids playing the game. So the kids may be able to play the game really well. They know everything about the game. They look at the pixels moving. They can predict how the pixels are going to move. Gives the illusion of time and space, and they form their theories of reality based on just the game, just the pixels. But they have no idea. A kid who really knows how to play a game really well has no idea what's going on with the code, the programming, the electronics,
Yeah.
nothing of that sort. So yeah, he says we're practically blind. It's like being in a Plato's cave. We don't see the
Right.
full reality out there.
Right. Well, and that kid's not even aware of his mom calling into him from the other room. He's so focused in on what he's doing, right? You
Yeah,
become deeply focused. And for me, that's what physical life is. It is
yeah,
this focus of consciousness into a vehicle or an
yeah,
avatar,
yeah.
like to use the game analogy, into an avatar. And
Literally
it
an
is
avatar. Yeah,
very convincing while we play. It's
yeah,
very convincing while we play.
yeah.
And I
But
do think we get out of it you know, during sleep.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
or we might
yeah.
pick up a new avatar, or we might, you know, touch on a little more base reality, or we might connect with a loved one who's no longer embodied. All of those things are
Definitely.
possible.
And we may be only tapping into a very tiny
Part of a
flavor of
spectrum.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, like a tiny frequency. There may be so many other realms of experience out there that we can't even imagine as human beings. So,
Right.
yeah, but
Exactly.
yeah, I
We're
don't
on
know.
the same boat.
Yeah, no, we're definitely on the same boat, and I'm glad I'm talking to someone who's open to these other, to these possibilities, open to uh, being receptive to more information, you know, and
Right. You have to be, or you become dogmatic like
yeah,
everyone else, right? You
yeah,
have to be, or you become the cynic as opposed to the skeptic.
definitely,
And I happily call myself a skeptic, but it has a requirement of open-mindedness.
absolutely, yeah. You have to, otherwise you're just dismissing it and calling
Right.
yourself a skeptic when you're not.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I don't know if you want to go. You know, I think we've
Well,
done about 2 hours, haven't we?
yeah, I was very close. Yes. So I don't know how long people will watch your videos for. I always try to keep mine within around an hour just because I hate to
Yeah,
lose people's attention. But it's been lovely.
yeah.
I've
If
really had
it's
a good
if
time.
it's interesting, I'm sure people will watch the whole thing. So
Right. Well, that's all I'd always hope for. Right.
yeah.
Uh,
No, very nice
so,
to meet you. And anytime you want to come back, or
oh, thank you. Well, thank you.
yeah,
It's been lovely talking to you too. And if you have any topics that you feel like, you know, asking somebody with a, you know, mediumistic background
right,
would,
with
you
more
know,
experience.
serve, you let me know and I'll come back and
I
visit with you
certainly
again.
will. Yeah, no, definitely. I'm doing my own exploration, but yeah,
Yeah.
if anyone's got
Well,
more experience with these things, yeah, I'm all ears. I'm quite happy to
fantastic.
listen.
Well, and I love that yours is experiential, right? Because I also, the title of my podcast is Soul Explorers. So it's very much about exploring what can be experienced,
That's
which is
right.
key.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's all the experience.
Right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, take care.
Thank you, Orlando. Thank you.
See you next time. Bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Okay. Now, if you're ready for me to go, I will.